And
Okay.
I think that means it goes to my YouTube channel. Okay, awesome. Just the biggest thing is to take the pauses if you do stumble, just so that I can do a nice clean edit. That's the main thing. Okay, so if you do have anything particular that you want me to talk to you about today before we get started?
No, I don't think so. I think we'll get into different rabbit holes. I think that'll be good.
Okay.
We'll figure it out.
Awesome. That sounds great. Okay, so we might as well get started. So are you recording at your end?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the WDCNZ podcast. And today I'm joined by Divya Manian, who joined us in 2012 to speak to us about web standards and pushing the web forward with web standards. So welcome aboard, Divya. It's nice to see you again.
Yes, me too. It's very nice to see you again.
So for those of our listeners who weren't at the 2012 conference, maybe you can give a brief rundown of what you spoke about and what your talk was all about.
Yeah, I think it was like 2.5 years almost years ago, right?
Yeah, almost 3 now.
Oh, I'm so old. Oh God. Anyways, I think I spoke about web standards and pushing the web forward with web standards, and I'm guessing I also talked about how to contribute to W3C, what are the new features, and how you can contribute to features, how you can file bugs, and things like that. Yeah.
You were currently working at the Adobe web platform back then. Is that still your role at Adobe? Are you still at Adobe?
I am still at Adobe, but that is not my role. I am now a product manager on Photoshop. So that's like a jump, yes.
So you've moved away from the web platform itself, and you're more focused on graphic designers, I guess.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, I'm no longer focusing on developers. I am focusing on designers as and I think, I don't know, I feel it's interesting to me. The kind of problems are similar, but the way you solve them is easier for designers, especially because you have control of the tools. And I guess working at Adobe or on a non-major browser vendor, it is a little harder because you don't have control of the tools, somebody else does, and you can't push changes that you want, like Chrome would or Safari would or Mozilla would on their own. Because you don't have a browser. So it's a lot more of political maneuvering and things like that I don't know, I kind of got sick of. So I was like, I don't know, this is better.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite an interesting road for you because before Adobe, you were at Opera, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's right.
So you went from a web browser to a web platform to now a graphic platform. Was that a very conscious decision on your part?
Yeah, I think so, because I was kind of tired of working on features that will be usable 10 years from now. Like there were a lot of things that we worked on Adobe Web Platform that are now finally seeing the light of the day. We had blend modes. It's finally available in all browsers, modern browsers. Still, it is only modern browsers, which means it's going to take another 5 years before it gets used properly. And then we contributed, like text wrapping stuff, shapes and things like that, which all are amazing on their own rights, but it's just going to take a long while. And the end users who look at websites may not even, appreciate what we have done, because it's like, okay, I mean, what's the big deal? The developers might, but given how horrendous most web APIs, especially the standards, are, I don't know. All of these features have evolved into somewhat not optimal experiences for developers too. So I'm like, I don't know. Is it worth it to work on something that is definitely never going to be optimal for anybody, or to work on something that actually works for a specific section of people and make them happy,
So you definitely got a bit blasé about the whole state of web standards then, after doing a web standards talk.
Yeah. I kind of was like, this is I wanted to do something more and be in a less stressful environment and learn something new, because I've been doing web standards for almost 6-7 years now, and I'm like, that's too much. So I think it's time to get out and do something else.
Okay, I mean, you've kind of seen the inside of how web standards gets formed and kind of a lot of the committees that go around those things. Do you think there's a failure in the process there that means that that gave you the experiences that you had that have kind of pushed you out of being in the web, or what, or is it something else that's led to those slowdowns, or is it a bad thing? Is it just something that you just don't want to put up with anymore?
No, I mean, I think the process itself is kind of very draining. The CSS process, the W3C, the WhatWG, then talking to browser vendors, talking to other folks, the problem usually is with the standards bodies is everybody thinks they are the developers or they are the end users, and suggest all these things that they want and claim because they are developers, they know what's the right thing to do. And then, then actual developers use it and they don't like it. And most of the specification writers are not people who are who have trained or know exactly what's the right way to write specifications. They write specifications because they have been around W3C for a long time. They know how specifications are written in W3C, not because that's the right way to write specifications. So it becomes like, oh, this makes it more clear or something like that. And then there's the internationalization stuff that always gets added at the end and never considered from the beginning. And then accessibility too is always like something that gets added at the end. Like how many W3C members are actually like disabled or require accessibility services that they endorse? I don't think there are that many. There are a lot of accessibility advocates in W3C, but I'm not sure, they are the ones who use it and might have, more credible claims of why we need those things.
Yeah, so it's kind of like designing by committee by people who are never going to use these things anyway.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly. Like, I mean, it's like these people, I mean, way I also do this now is I write emails, all of my day is writing emails, but it's also like I consciously spend at least twice a week trying to talk to customers who use Photoshop to identify how they use it or like what their workflow is, and we send builds for folks to get feedback from, which it doesn't happen that way in web standards at all. Like nobody, you would get feedback about a feature like 10 years after you have finished the specification, which is too late, And
So, I mean, how do they fix that? Is it a case of us web developers getting more involved in that process, or is it a case that they should change the process?
No, they should change the process. First of all, it is expensive to join W3C. So it costs like $1,600 or something a year as a membership. I think they try to introduce a lower level membership, but it is not it doesn't have voting powers. I don't know. It's still not good. It's still not good enough, and it takes a long time. You need to be involved, be funded to work on W3C stuff full time, because otherwise there's no way you can focus on the W3C work. Even when I was working as a freelancer before I joined Opera, it was really draining, and I could only do it because I was freelancing and I didn't have to focus on anything else. Like if I was somebody who was working on full-time projects, or like having kids, I don't think there's any way you can meaningfully contribute to W3C, mailing lists or, standards feedback normally. And I think the process needs to change. It's fundamentally, I think, broken.
So does that just take a leader to come through and say, "Nah, we're not gonna do it this way anymore. We're now gonna elect somebody into kind of actually gathering good feedback." Electing a project manager, I guess.
I think that's what I've been feeling for a while before I quit, was that the web standards definitely requires a project or a product manager. Like somebody needs to prioritize the vision. Somebody needs to be the dictator who's saying, we are going to be doing this. And this is why. And here are the people who have said why they need it or whatever. And who's ultimately accountable for delivering features. Right now, nobody's accountable. Like, so what? Like, if you have box shadows, so what?
Yeah.
What does it mean to you? Nothing. Like nobody's accountable, and that's shocking to me. Like the only open thing that we have on the internet, nobody's accountable for the changes. I mean, Tim Berners-Lee is kind of accountable, but I don't think so. I don't think anybody's going to hold him accountable for breaking, right?
Yeah, he's not about to get fined or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean, has your time working on the web platform and Opera kind of influenced your thinking now as you kind of push into a different, completely different scope?
Yeah, entirely. So, I mean, I think the thing that I know is that engineers who work on browsers are amazing engineers usually. Like that's something that I did not know before, because working in products, when you're working on silos of products or whatever, the kind of work you do is, I don't know, it's, you know, there's a lot more feedback, there's a lot more approval of stuff when you contribute to browsers that make you, I feel, because you have to write tests, you have to write, you know, it's a little more rigorous in terms of contributing code to browsers. So when I was working in Adobe platform or Opera, the kind of code that was written was kind of mostly very good. So that was really interesting. And then moving into Photoshop, I think there's a lot, because we have deadlines, that's another thing that we didn't have before with browsers. You can do whatever, like in 10 years' time, it'll be fine. But because we have deadlines and, you know, we have to take shortcuts at some point, you know, the code that we write, it is good, but it's not like the kind of, it was like night and day working with engineers on browsers versus engineers on applications. And I think working in browsers does make you a very good engineer. And that's good to know. You know, if you're a developer aspiring to be a really good programmer, I think contributing to browsers, browser code, you know, like Safari or Chrome or anything else would make you a better programmer, because you get expert reviews on your code.
Yeah.
So that was good. And then I think the other thing that I know is, you know, I do submit very diligent bug reports, which is kind of not usually the case with a lot of, you know, QE in products, because, I mean, because I know how to submit bug reports for browsers. I've been trained to do that. So it's good, you know, it makes sense here too. So it's good that way. And sometimes I just chip in to write code sometimes because, well, I don't know, it becomes urgent. Somebody has to do it, so I do it.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, and then it's good that I already use, you know, source control and things like that. So I haven't done it recently, but I can get the latest versions of builds and, you know, build them, compile them, and run it and things like that, which is good to know. I know that because of working in browsers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess Photoshop has kind of been a mainstay for at least graphic design for a long time, and photographers. Do you think your outlook on kind of, you know, you've met web developers, you've met web designers, kind of, does that allow you to influence kind of product direction as well as kind of everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main reasons why I wanted to work in Photoshop was also that I felt that there was a lot more to be done on the design end, that I could be able to contribute to more than working with the developer end, because of, you know, the process and not being, you know, working in a big major browser vendor company and things like that. So I figured, you know, Photoshop would be a good place to help make things better. So, you know, we have Generator, we have Creative Cloud Extract. I don't know if you have seen that service, which so Creative Cloud Extract allows you to upload a PSD and get values in CSS units, including rems, you know, even spacing between items and things like that. So at the very least, you're talking in the same language, the designers and the developers, and you're getting you know, you're not like, oh, it's 5px off from my comp or things like that. You know, those kinds of conversations don't need to happen And and I think this is something that's important, because a lot of times you see people, designers, looking at their finished products and being like, that's not exactly how I did it, and something feels off and you don't quite know what. And I think trying to help that communication, build that bridge, I feel is an interesting place to be.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of takes you onto the design language of the web, essentially CSS, and the mismatch between how graphic designers think, or at least visual designers think, and how CSS works, essentially. Do you see that as being kind of a narrowing gap? A lot more designers learning CSS and knowing CSS and understanding.
No, no, that's something that I have noticed that is not going to happen. I mean, there are some designers, it's a growing number of designers who are willing to spend time with CSS, learn CSS, which is good, but not design with CSS. Like, you still want like a blank canvas to start with, and like think of whatever ideas you can, paint it as you like, and then be like, okay, now if I have to do this on the web, how would that look like? And if I would do it on iOS, how does that look like? And things like that. And I feel like web is just one medium. Most designers are designing for multiple mediums. It's usually an iOS app plus the web stuff plus something else.
Yeah.
So so web is just one of those things, I feel. And that's why it's really frustrating, is that designing for the web is so incredibly more challenging than designing for iOS or Android. And that's I would lay the fault entirely on W3C and CSS. It's like.
So do you think it's the language at fault there, like the CSS language itself?
Yeah, I think it's kind of fundamentally broken the way the design was supposed to be. I mean, I don't think CSS was created to add. I mean, the way the whole HTML, CSS was vision, like the vision of those things was entirely different from how we are trying to use it right now. And that's, I mean, that's I guess that's okay, but it's just that we haven't adapted to the new environment as quickly as we should. And there's still an expectation that styling usually happens in the CSS, but a lot of times you are doing, like these days, atomic CSS or micro whatever, like doing everything in like a small section of things, which includes either JavaScript or HTML and CSS. Like, your CSS cannot be divorced from HTML. And I think that's different. Like, CSS is a different language, HTML is a different language. So, if you're a designer, you need to think of both these languages to do one thing, place a box on the screen. And that's why should anybody need to do that? And that's very frustrating to me. But yeah, I think, so which is why I feel designers are not going to be spending a lot of time trying to understand browser issues or like debugging stuff. I do think, though, there's a lot more interest in identifying performance, things that could be made better. I think there's a lot of performance metrics that would impact the design, and I don't think we have good tools for that yet. Like, if you use, how fast your page loads, how high fidelity should your images look like, and if you make this smaller, it's gonna load this much faster. How many images are on your page? And all of those things are being determined by the design, and those metrics would help the designers.
Yeah, do you think that's a tooling gap? Do you think we need kind of better tooling to expose that?
Yeah, I think Steve Souders is kind of trying to do something similar with his new startup, and I think that's very interesting, because I think that's something that we should be checking into and exposing to designers early on. And I think in general, designers need to have more data to design, and there is definitely a tooling gap in terms of having the data to design.
Yeah, and are designers actually kind of interested in doing that, in making a more responsive or at least faster site, in your experience?
Yeah, I think everybody wants to. It's just they don't feel like there is anything that they can use to determine how to do that. And I think it's also like, how do I know my design will make a site slow? Like, there's no way to know when you're designing if what you're designing is going to make the site slow. I mean, other than the fact that it could be that you're saying there will be 10 images, but ultimately it's the image size that's going to determine how slow that is.
Yeah.
And so, so there's a lot of things that combine together that makes final product, the website, slow. It could be the JavaScript, it could be the images, it could be many things. So, it could be the slowness in network load, it could be the slowness in scrolling. So how do you know which is the one that's impacting your design? And so I think the designers want to use data. A lot of people that I talk to as designers, they're like, well, I want to know, in Photoshop, say for web dialog, there is this small thing that tells you, it takes you like 2 hours to load this file on I don't know, like an old modem line or something like that. And then there's like a bunch of time. And people said they like to see that. I was like, why would you want to see that information? Like, well, that will help me knowing how fast this page is going to load with this image. And I was like, oh, that's a good point. And I'm specifically working on kind of finding new ways to get images out of Photoshop. So that was interesting for me to know. And I was like, okay, that's a good data point. And I realized that if we were to make such things available in the tools or in some way to the designers, that would be really useful for them.
Okay, cool. I mean, you've spoken about a lot of the frustrations of the things you didn't like about working in the web. Are there any things that you particularly miss about working on the web?
Yeah, I mean, I do miss working with some really cool people. There are some very nice people working on the web, and they still are working on changing things. And I'm like, I don't know how they can do it, but well, they're doing it. So, well, that's more power to them. So that's nice. And I think I don't know, I think I have kind of outgrown this, but there was, it felt fun to make, CSS, small tricks and, solving, like making a dragon with CSS or whatever, those kinds of things, or like design patterns with gradients. I don't know. Now I don't feel like they are interesting to me. That I really wish I was back in the days when those things were really fun. And now, for me, it's like that. It's so complicated to make something with CSS. I feel like that's the thing that needs to be solved. Not that you can do tricks with CSS, which I think that's fine, but that's not the big problem.
Yeah. I mean, was it fun because it was so hard? Like, okay, I've achieved something by doing that thing.
Yes, and I think that's kind of what most people. Let me not stereotype everybody who is speaking or whatever. I feel like that's kind of why a lot of people who are influential on the web get into the web, because they find something challenging and keep doing it. And then everybody's like, oh, wow, how did you do it? Because it is very challenging. And then you get to speak at events saying how you did this very challenging thing. And now I'm like, it should not even be challenging. Should not be the point. It's not the point that it's difficult. The point should be it's easy to do. And I think that's why you see a lot more people veering towards, especially designers veering towards like iOS prototyping or Android prototyping. It's easier, I feel, than doing for the web.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess, do you see any glimmer of light in the web, essentially? I mean, you've been away from it a little while now, but do you see any way forward that we can solve all these problems, and it's happening or not?
I think it is kind of happening. I feel like Google and Safari, Apple, Google, all of these folks are realizing that design and layout is a crucial aspect of the web. And I feel like layout has always never given its focus that it needs. Grid layout. We introduced CSS regions, but that Google didn't like. But so those we mainly did it because that was a very important problem to solve on the web, is layout. We keep joking about centering is not even, you can't center CSS, we landed on the moon or whatever. But that is a pretty, that's the thing that we've ignored for so long. And that's why people are using, other, apps or whatever, because we are not able to solve for layout. And I think that's something that companies have realized now that is important. So it's good to know that. And I saw some sneak peeks of some ideas that I think Google Chrome team is having about making the dev tools more friendly to everybody. And I think that's good too. That's going to help more on making the web easier. So there is some glimmer of hope, but I'm not sure there's anything that we can do with the W3C process. So it's still very exclusive. It is still only available to very few people and very few vested interests, more like, and not to like everybody. So by that, I don't know. That might change someday, hopefully.
So if we manage to kind of do away with the W3C and have an actual dictator overlord of the web, would you ever be encouraged back to working in the web, or is that it now? Have you kind of like moved on and you're never going to look back?
I mean, I like work. I mean, I like working on the web-ish. I just don't want to do it publicly anymore. I don't know why. It's just I don't know why. It's like I don't know. I mean, I don't want to be talking about the new features in the web, that for sure, because I'm like, I mean, that's, but I would be more interested if I were to work with like developers and like get their feedback, making things better, the APIs better, you know, all those things about making, if we could like ship a new feature or an existing feature, but that make it better within 6 months, that would be great. Like that would be like ideal situation, and I would be happy to work on such things. That would be like awesome. But like talking about web in general, I don't know. I'm kind of sick of just talking about things. I want to be like actually making change. You know, these are cool, but here's what we did to make things better. And you know, like, and these are the bugs we resolved, and this is how your life's gonna be easy. And that's good to like that I feel is an interesting problem to work on.
Yeah, I mean, what's your release cycle like at the moment? Are you kind of working towards monthly releases or 3 monthly releases?
Oh, no. We can't do monthly releases. Yeah, we can't. You know, Photoshop's been around for, I think since before, I think late 80s. So that's like almost 30 years. The code is kind of old. I mean, every possible software pattern, architectural pattern that you can think of is there in that code base.
I can imagine. It'd be dragons written across.
Yeah, and so I think we work around like twice a year. We do releases. We try to do releases twice a year at least. So that itself is kind of takes a lot of our energy to do that, especially because there are lots of bugs. There are a lot of moving parts. And, you know, somebody else may have changed the code somewhere else, not knowing it will impact someone else. And then it'll be like, oh, and then we need to make sure we don't crash. And that's a lot of our testing. So even though we may say we have 6 months, we would spend at least 2 months just testing because you don't want crashes. So it's a pretty quick-paced environment. So you know we would have to ship things within 6 months. But we need the buffer of 2 months for testing, and that's a little annoying, but we have to work around that.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah. I mean, it would be one of those applications that benefits from a lot of manual testing as opposed to automated testing. There's not a huge amount that you can automate in that world. But we are trying to automate more stuff. Even the manual testing, we are trying to see if there's anything that we can automate. Try to see if there's visual difference, especially in getting images out. We want to make sure, there's the fidelity of the export is maintained. And we are investigating making those things automated at the very least, if nothing else. Fair enough. I mean, you say you're in a fast-paced environment. I kind of feel like if there's one lasting legacy of the web, it's that web applications have forced other applications into a much tighter release cycle.
That is true. That is so true. I mean, before Photoshop, I was working on another product where we were doing like every 2 months a release. And I was like, that's insane. We were using web. So even now in what we are doing in Photoshop, we are using web technology. So the user interface that we are going to be creating for new ways to save images, it will be written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, although it will look native. So we are using Chromium, embedded Chromium to do this. So and it makes us be faster because we can change things very quickly. The UI is fairly trivial to change, which is good. but it also means there's some uncanny valley stuff that will happen if you do not like be vigilant about it. So it was like we released a version called Extract Assets last October, and it was like my very first product thingy that I released, and when I look at it now, I'm just cringing because it's so uncanny valley. Like, it's written in HTML. You are like, it's just frustrating, like how different it is. It's one thing to write HTML for a website because it is looked or people experience it as a website, but it's another thing to write HTML as a native app because people experience it as a native app, especially in Photoshop because you have native dialogues and you have our dialogue, and I'm like, that looks so weird. Doesn't quite feel right, And there are lots of controls look very different for the web compared to native dialogues. And then I'm like, I wish we could have changed those things. And like when you're testing stuff, things may seem to work when you're testing, when you're debugging, but doesn't work when you close the debugger or whatever. There's a lot of like small things that are like, because there are so many levels we are going through to get our UI to work that it could go wrong very quickly. So yeah, and I think it's really fun though. I mean, and I do think the web as a UI interface, there is some merit to that. I just don't know because it's really easy to get started. And anybody can, change very basic stuff like color or whatever compared to other things. So I don't know. I think there's something to that, but we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully we can extract all the good bits for you, and you can leave aside all the rest of the stuff. Hey, yes. I'm glad you're enjoying your role now, and I'm sorry that the web was such a bad experience for you.
No. It was fine. It's just a little. Yeah, it's just. I think right now I feel like there are bigger problems to solve for me personally, and I think it's good to be there and try to solve those things. And I think I would try to solve problems for the web, as we're saying, if we were to get to a point where like shipping things and shipping APIs and things like that. I would love to solve problems then. If you're
fair enough.
Yeah.
So any web developers listening shouldn't lose complete heart in the job.
I think web developers have it slightly more easy than people who work on browsers. I don't know. I mean, it's not. I'm saying it's not easy. It's not easy to be a web developer. But I think with what we have, we can always scope it down to the features that work and ship with those things. And I think we need to, as a web developers, we need to push back more on things that appear complicated. Not be like, oh, I'm dumb, and the spec is, the thing that they are right, and I'm like just stupid or something. But no, it needs to appeal to us. If you can't understand something, then the spec needs to be better so you can understand things. And I think that's something we need to push back on. Make specs easier to understand.
Yeah, I suspect most web developers have never read specs as such. They're very dry documents, very hard to understand. I admire people like Paul Irish, who's done a lot of work around those, a lot more accessible to people. But hey, thank you very much for sparing some time to talk to us. I think that comes to the end of our allotted time, as it were. Yep. Is there anything else you kind of wanted to talk about or mention while we're here?
No, I think that's about it. Well, don't lose faith. Well,
hey, we won't, and we'll look forward to seeing you in New Zealand at some point soon. I'm sure. Love to see you over here.
Okay.
Hey, take care and best of luck in your current job.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.